Welcome to our new episode.
Imagine standing on a sun-baked hilltop in northern Ethiopia, watching the faint outlines of towering stone obelisks piercing the horizon. The air hums with history. Beneath your feet lie the ruins of palaces, temples, and tombs older than most European kingdoms. Once, this land was home to one of the greatest powers of the ancient world, a forgotten African empire whose merchants sailed to Rome, Persia, Arabia, and India. This was Axum, the lost kingdom of the Red Sea. Few today realize that nearly 1,800 years ago, while most of Europe still struggled through tribal fragmentation, the Kingdom of Axum was minting its own gold coins, building monuments taller than any in sub-Saharan Africa, and commanding trade routes that connected 3 continents. Long before modern Ethiopia, a civilization rose quietly between the highlands and the Red Sea. The Axumite Empire began around the 1st century CE, centered in what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. Its capital city, Axum, sat at the crossroads of inland Africa and the ancient Red Sea trade network. Axum's location was no accident. The kingdom occupied a strategic plateau, fertile enough for agriculture, close enough to ports like Adulis, and elevated high above the heat and diseases of the coast. From here, caravans carried ivory, gold, incense, and exotic animal skins down to the Red Sea, while ships from Rome, India, and Arabia arrived loaded with wine, glass, and spices. But to understand Axum's greatness, you need to imagine the world of that time. Around the 2nd century CE, Rome controlled the Mediterranean, India's Gupta Empire flourished, and China's Han Dynasty traded silk through the distant routes of Central Asia. Axum was their link, the bridge between East and West. The port city of Adulis, located near modern-day Eritrea, was the lifeline of Axum's wealth. Ancient Greek traders wrote about it in a travelogue known as the Periplus of the Eritrean Sea, dating from the 1st century CE. The document describes Adulis as a bustling harbor where Roman ships docked to trade for African goods. From here, Axum exported ivory from Central Africa, gold from the Ethiopian highlands, tortoiseshell, obsidian, and even slaves. In return, they imported silk from India, glassware and wine from Rome, and fine cloth from Egypt and Arabia. This constant flow of goods transformed Axum into a cosmopolitan hub, a melting pot of languages, ideas, and religions. Merchants spoke Greek, Sabaean, and Ge'ez, the ancient Ethiopian language. You could find Roman amphora, Indian beads, and Arabian incense burners side by side in Axumite markets. The empire's rulers quickly realized that controlling trade meant controlling destiny. At the height of its power, Axum was ruled by a line of kings whose titles carried divine weight. They called themselves Kings of Kings, mirroring the grandeur of Persia and Rome. Among them, one name shines the brightest, King Ezana. Before Ezana's reign, Axum was already a regional giant. Its armies had conquered neighboring tribes, expanded into the Nubian lands of Meroe, and even established colonies across the Red Sea in Yemen. But under Ezana, the empire reached its golden age. Ezana, early 4th century CE, transformed Axum into one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world. He was the first Axumite ruler to mint coins, gold, silver, and bronze, stamped with inscriptions in Greek and symbols of his faith. This wasn't just economic genius, it was a statement. It told the world that Axum was equal to Rome, Persia, or Byzantium. But Ezana's reign is remembered for more than wealth. It marked a turning point in African history, the Christianization of Axum. According to ancient chronicles, a young Syrian or Greek boy named Frumentius was captured in the Red Sea region and brought to Axum as a slave. Over time, he rose to prominence at court, serving the royal family and helping tutor the young prince Ezana. When Ezana became king, Frumentius's teachings deeply influenced him. Around 330 CE, Ezana converted to Christianity, making Axum one of the very first Christian empires in the world, even before much of Europe had adopted the faith. He declared Christianity the official religion, built churches, and established relations with the Church of Alexandria in Egypt. This conversion changed Axum's cultural identity forever. While neighboring kingdoms in Arabia and Africa remained polytheistic, Axum aligned itself with the growing Christian world, a move that would later shape Ethiopia's unique spiritual tradition. Even today, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church traces its roots back to King Ezana and Frumentius, who became known as Saint Abba Salama, Father of Peace. If you visit Axum today, the most striking reminders of its ancient glory are the giant obelisks, or stelae, carved from single blocks of granite. Some reach over 30 meters, 100 feet high, and weigh hundreds of tons. These monuments were erected to mark the tombs of kings and nobles. Each obelisk was carefully chiseled with false windows, doors, and floors, mimicking multi-storied palaces carved in stone. How the Axumites moved and erected these massive stones with primitive tools remains a mystery even today. Archaeologists have compared them to the pyramids of Egypt in scale and ambition. The largest unfinished obelisk, which lies broken near the main site, would have stood over 33 meters or 108 feet tall and weighed more than 500 tons, making it one of the heaviest monolithic stones ever attempted in human history. It is a silent reminder of Axum's engineering brilliance, and perhaps of a project that went too far. Some legends claim the obelisk cracked and fell during construction, killing workers, and was left as an omen. Axum's golden age stretched from the 3rd to the 6th century CE. While most African civilizations of the time were local or tribal, Axum commanded international attention. It was even recognized by the Roman Empire, which listed it as one of the 4 great powers of the world, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. That's a staggering thought, that in Africa, long before the rise of European colonialism, there was an empire commanding fleets and diplomacy at a global scale. Axum ships sailed through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into the Indian Ocean, trading directly with Indian ports like Muziris and Berigazza. Roman merchants in Egypt recorded the Axumite ivory as among the finest in the world. Axumite coins have been found in southern India, Sri Lanka, and even Jerusalem. Unlike most ancient African kingdoms that left little written record, Axum left behind inscriptions carved in Greek, Sabaean, and Ge'ez, detailing wars, victories, and faith. One of the most famous inscriptions, found on the Ezana stone, describes the king's conversion and his military triumphs, a Rosetta Stone of Ethiopian history. By the 5th century CE, Axum was not only an economic power, but also a spiritual force. Christian monks and missionaries spread across the highlands, blending biblical tradition with local customs. Churches were carved into rock, crosses decorated coins, and the royal court maintained correspondence with Byzantine emperors. This empire's strength lay in its ability to balance trade and faith, to be both a spiritual center and a commercial bridge. But as history often shows, the higher an empire climbs, the farther it can fall. By the 6th century, new powers were rising around the Red Sea. In Arabia, the Himyarite kingdom fell to Axumite invasion, but in doing so,
Axum overstretched its reach. A few decades later, a new religious and political force began to emerge in the Arabian Peninsula: Islam. Though Islam's rise came after Axum's peak, its emergence would dramatically shift the balance of trade and influence in the region. The Red Sea, once an Axumite lake, would soon be dominated by Muslim fleets and merchants.
The Red Sea once glittered with Axumite sails. Gold-tipped ships cut through the waves toward India and Arabia, carrying ivory, frankincense, and spices. But now imagine standing on that same shore centuries later. The docks are quiet, the markets empty, the harbor silted with mud. The empire that once ruled these waters has fallen silent. How did a kingdom that once rivaled Rome and Persia vanish almost without a trace? Every empire leaves clues to its downfall long before the collapse. For Axum, the first cracks appeared around the 6th century CE. Its power had always depended on trade. Control of the Red Sea meant wealth, and wealth meant influence. But across the water in Arabia, events were unfolding that would change the world. In 525 CE, King Caleb of Axum launched an ambitious military expedition across the Red Sea. The Himyarite kingdom in southern Arabia had persecuted Christian minorities, and as a defender of the faith, Caleb sent a vast army to intervene. His troops defeated the Himyarite ruler Du Nuwas and installed a client king loyal to Axum. At first, this seemed like a triumph. Christianity had been protected, trade routes secured. Yet that victory came at a heavy cost. Maintaining a foreign colony drained the empire's treasury, stretched its armies thin, and provoked resistance from local Arab tribes. When rebellion broke out a decade later, Axum could no longer sustain control. Its garrisons were slaughtered, and the last Axumite soldiers fled across the sea. For the first time in centuries, Axum's aura of invincibility cracked. At roughly the same time, the environment turned against them. Geological and archaeological studies show that the Ethiopian highlands suffered a period of prolonged drought during the late 6th and 7th centuries. Harvests failed, rivers ran lower, soil eroded. For a mountain kingdom dependent on agriculture, famine struck at the heart of its stability. The royal treasury that once overflowed with gold now struggled to feed the population. Peasants abandoned the fields, caravan routes became unsafe, local rulers began acting independently. Trade itself was changing. Roman Egypt, one of Axum's main partners, had fallen to the Byzantine Empire, and soon new Persian and Arab powers dominated the eastern seas. Where once Roman merchants purchased ivory and incense in Adulis, now ships from Arabia and the Persian Gulf carried their own goods directly to India and beyond, bypassing Axum entirely. The empire that had stood at the center of world commerce now found itself on the periphery. Then came a revolution unlike any the world had seen. In the early 7th century, in the deserts of Arabia, the Prophet Muhammad began preaching a new faith, Islam. Within decades of his death, Muslim armies and traders had united Arabia and pushed outward into the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. For Axum, Islam's rise was both a threat and opportunity. At first, relations were surprisingly peaceful. According to Islamic tradition, when some of Muhammad's early followers fled persecution in Mecca, they sought refuge across the Red Sea in the Christian Kingdom of Axum. The Negus, referred to in Arabic sources as the Negus, offered them protection and refused to surrender them to their enemies. In gratitude, the Prophet instructed his followers never to wage war against the Axumites. That brief alliance was remarkable. Two faiths, newly born and ancient, meeting in tolerance rather than conquest. But as Islam expanded across the Red Sea and up the Nile, Axum's isolation deepened.
Muslim merchants soon dominated Red Sea and Indian Ocean trade, founding new port cities such as Aden, Zabid, and Berbera. Adulis, once Axum's golden harbor, fell into decline, possibly destroyed in conflicts or rendered useless by silt and neglect. Without maritime trade, Axum's economy suffocated. As the coastal regions grew unstable, the Axumite court began retreating deeper into the Ethiopian highlands, searching for more defensible terrain. The royal capital, once vibrant and open to the world, became a mountain citadel cut off from its lifelines. Archaeological surveys show a gradual shift of settlements away from the Red Sea coast toward the interior, places like Adua, Yeha, and later Lalibela. This migration marked not only a physical withdrawal, but a cultural transformation. The cosmopolitan empire of traders became an inward-looking kingdom of monks, farmers, and priests. Still, the memory of greatness lingered. Ancient stelae stood like petrified giants, silent witnesses to a vanished age. Pilgrims continued to visit Axum's old cathedrals, believing that the city still housed the Ark of the Covenant, the legendary chest that once held the tablets of Moses. Faith replaced commerce as the soul of the nation. By the 8th century, Axum's political power had largely dissolved. The world beyond its mountains moved on. Islam ruled from Spain to India. China's Tang dynasty sent ships across the Indian Ocean. Europe descended into the early Middle Ages. Yet in Ethiopia's highlands, isolated communities kept alive a flicker of the Axumite flame. They copied manuscripts in Ge'ez, chanted hymns that echoed Ezana's old faith, and built new stone churches carved straight into rock, the most famous later in Lalibela, centuries after Axum's fall, but inspired by its spirit. It is here that Axum's legacy survived, not as an empire, but as a civilization of faith. For historians, the disappearance of Axum poses one of Africa's great mysteries. Unlike Rome, it left no ruins of amphitheaters or aqueducts. Unlike Egypt, no pyramids full of hieroglyphs explaining its decline. Instead, Axum faded gradually from foreign records. By the 9th century, Arab geographers who once praised its riches described it only as a remote Christian land beyond the desert. The gold coin stopped circulating. The port of Adulis vanished from maps. Even the mighty obelisks toppled, victims of earthquakes and time. Some scholars argue environmental degradation, deforestation, soil exhaustion, and drought crippled agriculture. Others believe Axum's elite shifted focus from trade to religion, losing the economic foundation that sustained empire. In truth, it was likely a combination of all these forces: overreach, isolation, changing climate, and the inexorable pull of history. Yet, as political power waned, Axum's spiritual and cultural legacy endured. The Christian faith that Ezana adopted in the 4th century never died. Monasteries continued to flourish, preserving not only scripture, but also fragments of science, medicine, and philosophy. While Europe struggled through its dark ages, Ethiopian scribes illuminated manuscripts with bright colors and gold leaf, keeping alive a lineage of knowledge stretching back to Axum. Foreign travelers who reached the region in later centuries wrote of a mysterious Christian kingdom hidden beyond the Muslim world. Medieval Europeans called it Prester John's Kingdom, a mythical realm said to be ruled by a priest-king of immense power. Though legend exaggerated, its seed was real, the echo of Axum and its heirs in the Ethiopian highlands. Isolation shaped Ethiopia's destiny for a millennium. Surrounded by Muslim lands to the north and east, cut off from Europe by desert and sea, the descendants of Axum remained largely independent. They developed a unique version of Christianity, distinct yet ancient, keeping rituals and scriptures that had disappeared elsewhere. They also preserved something rarer still, a sense of continuity. To this day, Ethiopian kings trace their ancestry back to King Ezana and even further to the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon of Israel. Whether historical or legendary, that lineage expresses an unbroken thread linking Axum's past to modern Ethiopia. For centuries, the outside world knew almost nothing of Axum. European explorers arriving in the 19th century were stunned by what they found: vast stone obelisks rising from the earth, ancient inscriptions carved in Greek and Ge'ez, coins bearing Christian crosses minted when most of Europe was still pagan. In 1868, British archaeologists documented the site, confirming that the ruins were far older than medieval Ethiopia. Later excavations revealed palaces, royal tombs, and the remains of a sophisticated urban culture. The story of Axum began to re-emerge from the dust of time. The Fall of Axum is not just a tale of decline. It's a reminder of how civilizations rise and fade through the shifting currents of trade, faith, and environment. It challenges the outdated idea that Africa had no great empires before colonial contact. Axum stood as proof that
Africans built a literate, monetized, internationally connected state long before Europe's Renaissance. In its fall, we also glimpse the resilience of its people. Though the empire vanished, its culture survived, evolving into the medieval kingdoms of Zangwe and Solomonic Ethiopia, whose rock-hewn churches and illuminated texts continue to awe the world. Picture once more those granite stelae under the blazing Ethiopian sun. They cast long shadows over the highland grass, whispering stories of merchants, priests, and kings who believed their empire would last forever. Time buried their palaces, silenced their harbors, and scattered their coins. Yet their faith endured, carried by generations who still chant prayers in the same ancient tongue. Axum may have fallen, but it was never truly lost. As the 7th century dawned, a mysterious silence began to descend upon Axum. The great ports that once bustled with life, Adulis, Massawa, and Zula, grew quiet. The kingdom's ships, once symbols of dominance across the Red Sea, began to disappear from the waters that had carried Axum's fortune for centuries. What could have happened to such a mighty empire that rivaled Rome, Persia, and India? One of the key reasons historians point to is the changing global trade routes. The rise of Islamic powers across Arabia drastically shifted maritime commerce. As the Muslim caliphates took control of the Red Sea and much of North Africa, Axum suddenly found itself isolated. The once profitable trade routes through the Red Sea were now under the control of rival powers who had little incentive to allow Axumite merchants access to the lucrative markets of Arabia or the Mediterranean. Another major blow came from within. Over-farming and deforestation around Axum's highlands slowly degraded the soil. As the empire expanded, forests were cleared to make way for agriculture and livestock. This caused erosion and a decline in productivity, something that historians today believe was one of the earliest cases of ecological collapse in recorded African history. Then came the Persian invasions and the decline of Byzantine trade. When the Byzantines, Axum's closest trading partner, lost control over Egypt and the eastern Mediterranean, the flow of gold, silk, and spices nearly ceased. Axum's economy, once based on international exchange, began to wither. Ironically, Axum had once offered sanctuary to the very first Muslims fleeing persecution from Mecca, known as the First Hijra. The Axumite king, known as Ashama ibn Abjar in Islamic tradition, gave them protection and refused to surrender them to Quraysh envoys. In gratitude, Prophet Muhammad reportedly said, "Leave the Abyssinians alone, as long as they leave you alone."
But as Islam spread across Arabia and North Africa, the political map changed drastically. By the 8th century, the Muslim caliphates controlled the Red Sea coasts and all the major ports that once belonged to Axum. Cut off from sea trade and surrounded by new Islamic states, the Axumite Empire was forced to retreat inland. Over time, the capital city itself, Axum, began to lose prominence. The seat of power moved south to the highlands of Lasta and later to the region known as Amhara. The empire's Christian legacy survived, but the glorious city that had once minted its own coins and sent embassies to Byzantium slowly turned into ruins. Despite its decline, Axum never disappeared from memory. In Ethiopian Christian tradition, it remained the spiritual heart of the nation. According to Ethiopian Orthodox belief, the Ark of the Covenant, the chest said to hold the 10 Commandments given to Moses, is housed in Axum's Church of St. Mary of Zion. No outsider has ever been allowed to see it. The guardian monk, chosen for life, is the only person permitted near it. Many explorers, from the 18th century to the modern era, have tried to uncover the truth, but the mystery remains untouched. The story of the Ark gave Axum an almost mythical status. Even when the world forgot about it, Axum remained alive in faith, in legend, and in the Ethiopian psyche as the resting place of divine power. When European explorers finally reached Axum in the 19th century, they were stunned. Massive granite obelisks, some over 100 feet tall, lay scattered around the ancient city. They were covered in intricate carvings that depicted doors, windows, and geometric patterns, clearly meant to resemble royal palaces carved in stone. One of these, the obelisk of Axum, stood over 24 meters, or 78 feet tall, and weighed more than 160 tons. Even today, experts debate how such a colossal monument could have been carved, transported, and erected using 4th century technology. Archaeologists also discovered ancient coins bearing the names of Axumite kings, Endubis, Ezana, Caleb, and inscriptions written in Ge'ez, the ancient Ethiopian script still used in church liturgy. King Ezana's conversion to Christianity in the 4th century marked Axum as the first African kingdom to officially adopt Christianity, even before the Roman Empire declared it the state religion. His inscriptions, found etched into stone stelae, describe his conquests and his faith in the Lord of Heaven. Excavations in the 20th century revealed elaborate royal tombs beneath the obelisks. Some of these tombs contain gold jewelry, bronze artifacts, and finely crafted pottery, evidence of a highly developed society with advanced artisanship. One of the most remarkable finds was a stone throne room believed to have belonged to one of Axum's early kings. The throne, carved out of a single block of granite, symbolized the divine right of the monarch to rule as both king and priest, a concept deeply embedded in Ethiopian tradition. Yet many areas of Axum remain unexcavated. Archaeologists believe that beneath the modern city lie layers of history, possibly palaces, archives, and temples that could completely rewrite what we know about early African civilization. Even after its fall, Axum's cultural and religious legacy shaped Ethiopia for over a millennium. The Solomonic dynasty, which ruled Ethiopia until the 20th century, claims direct descent from King Solomon of Israel and the Queen of Sheba, whose legendary meeting, they said, birthed the Ethiopian royal line. This belief was central to Ethiopia's identity. When Emperor Haile Selassie came to power in the 20th century, he traced his lineage back to Axum and to Solomon himself. For the Rastafarian movement, Haile Selassie became a messianic figure, linking Axum's legacy to a global spiritual awakening. In many ways, Axum's story never truly ended, it evolved. It became a symbol of African pride, endurance, and mystery. It stands as proof that long before European empires or Middle Eastern dynasties, Africa had its own centers of power, wealth, and innovation, places like Axum that connected worlds and carried wisdom across oceans. Today, visitors to Axum walk among the ruins of a forgotten empire. Massive stone pillars, broken altars, and weathered inscriptions. The air is dry, the earth red, and the silence heavy with history. Locals still speak of the old kings, of Ezana's conversion, of the Ark hidden beyond reach. And though centuries have passed since Axum's ships last sailed the Red Sea, its spirit endures, etched into the landscape, whispered in legend, and remembered by those who seek to uncover the truth behind Africa's lost kingdoms. Perhaps the real secret of Axum isn't gold, trade, or conquest. It's the story of resilience, how a civilization can rise, fall, and yet live on through its faith, culture, and the memory of its people. Because some empires may vanish from maps, but their echoes never fade.